And hello, welcome.
Hi, love.
Hello,
Hello
welcome
again.
everyone. We're settling in now, going into our panel with our distinguished guests. And just so you all know, I have just taken it upon myself to check in with a lot of the folks. Anyone who came up to me and started a conversation, I asked them if they had a question for this panel and sort of filtered it through my own life and kind of condensed it down to a few questions, which we'll start now if you're open to it. So these questions are for anyone in any order. We'd love probably to hear from all of you, or if you have something to say on it. The first one's really interesting. It's around our ability to heal. You know, this is a trauma healing wisdom, beautiful thing. With neuroplasticity, we know that we can literally heal, we can reprogram. Is there a limit to that, or do you feel that it's the possibilities are endless in that regard? Can we actually heal out of some of these larger systemic problems that we face, like violence? Do you think that it's possible for us to heal on that level, on that in that depth?
You mean ongoing violence?
Ongoing violence,
Oh,
this whole concept, I'll tell you, is three questions I'm combining here.
Oh,
This whole retaliation and revenge thing that we see played out throughout human history over and over and over. Is there a pathway forward? Could we potentially heal out of that as a species?
what do you mean by heal out of? Can you
Can we stop killing each other?
stop calling each other?
yeah.
Can we-
That's a good idea.
Right? But
What a concept. What a concept.
Right? Yeah.
No, it's a question that I've really been preoccupied with since I was a child growing up on the Nazis. Germans were a civilized place and suddenly started to kill people. It always preoccupied me. And I've been a very serious student of history and traveled the world. I have not seen any society where people have managed to do it. And one of the really painful books I read was a book called 1491, what the Americas looked like before the white man came. And a lot of people, well, colonialists really messed up the Americas. And you go like, oh my God, but people did to each other before the white man came.
Yeah.
Nobody has solved it yet, but I'm still looking. I asked the Dalai Lama the same question, and he answered it to me in Tibetan. So I don't quite know what the answer is. But is individual healing possible? Absolutely. That's what I do as a researcher. We really look at what helps and to what degree does it help. And certainly our last study on psychedelics had stunning results in terms of people really changing their minds in a very profound way. And Gabor also is very much into this, and it is possible, but it's hard work.
That's, I think, the key. Sometimes things go very quickly. Other times it's hard work and it takes time. Yeah.
I think ever since we've had what we call civilization and um, inequality, suppression of women, suppression of the matriarchal energy, classes that ruled other classes, and then countries that, or people that wanted the property and sometimes even the bodies of other people. We've had violence. I have no doubt that there was violence before civilization. There was probably fights for territory and fights for access to food resources and so on before. There's not a question of. So I think that's probably there's always been some violence. On the other hand, it's also true that there's certain social, economic, and political conditions that encourage violence, and others that mitigate it. I don't know if there's an ultimate answer to the question of violence. Certainly, human history is not very encouraging, as Bessel points out. The real question for me is not about what might happen in the future, but what can any of us either personally or as a group, do about the violence that's around us right now, or about the violent, or about the conditions in this society that promote violence. I mean, an obvious one is racism, you know? So is it true that we're totally helpless in the face of all that? Or even without knowing the ultimate outcome, and I can't at this point imagine any kind of a utopian future where there won't be violence, but I think we can address the question of violence and the conditions that promote it in our time and in our day, and decide to engage with it, try and do something about it, or not try and do anything about it. So I think it's more a question of who are we now in a relationship to what's happening now, and how do we want to respond to it? That's what the question brings up for me.
I don't know. I don't know. Uh, I mean, when we think about if there's an ongoing erosion at a wound, can that wound heal? No. But, you know, I go back to my dear friend Inkem Defoe's work, and really about that first phase of healing, which is stability. And you're expanding the resilience, not so that every time you fall, you just get back up again. That's not resilience. But so that you begin to feel like you have more choice within a power of oppression, or an oppression that is impacting you so deeply. And I think I would call that the little win. And to give people some sense of agency, some sense of power within a structure that is very purpose is to demean that. I think that's what's possible. A good friend of mine wrote a book, How We Ended Racism, which is a very evocative title. And what their research demonstrated was, first, the tools have to be there. And there's a belief in his book that, okay, the tools are actually here. So what's the issue? And it was the belief that it could be possible, and that there was the certain amount of the population had to go with it, and the rest, that it wasn't 100%. And I really appreciated that idea of, like, we don't have to get 100% there for mass change. And we, thanks to these humans and so many other humans who aren't on this panel right now, the tools are out there. You all are bringing those tools out into the world. Those tools are spreading massively. This work is hot to trot. And so now I think at some point, it's also a turning point of the belief that this is enough to make some change. And that doesn't have to be everything. Yeah.
I think it was probably somebody here knows. I think there's a book called Tipping Point,
Mhm.
or at least a concept. It's like 21%. It's not a lot. It's not half. It's not even close to half. That's needed to have a whole society change,
Yeah.
right? You just need a certain, I think it's 21%, something like that. So if we're doing this work, like, yes, we can talk interpersonal and individual, and we know we can see individuals go from horrific violence to, finding peace, finding connectivity, all of these things. What would it take is the goal of our work to move out of just and do we have a responsibility to move out of just the individual into the collective, or not? Like, do we just stay in our own lane or not?
I think we don't spend enough time looking at when it has worked. And I personally feel very blessed to have lived in the time that I've lived in. Europe came to the end of the Second World War. Europe had been a mess for centuries, fighting each other. In the last 80 years, Europe has by and large been at peace until the invasion of Ukraine, which is an extraordinary human development. And now things are beginning to fray. And as the beginning to fray is because people don't remember how bad it was, that we're once again getting polarized, Europe's also, but we don't hold on to when it works. It worked very well in Scandinavia. I was recently at St. Quentin prison, you know, very infamous prison. They're having a trauma-based justice program. It is sensational, but we don't hear about it. And so it's very important for us, and it's very much what we're into, is to identifying programs that work and not just moan about what doesn't work, because there's a lot of amazing work being done out there.
Yeah, you know, there are primate species that bang each other over the head all the time. And there are other ones that don't do that. They cuddle and they have sex.
But we did, well, we never had sex together, Peter, but we banged each other over the head and we were still civilized together, which is,
Semi.
we're so,
Yeah.
we're so,
That's a point.
epitomes
That's
of
a point.
civilized
We're
people in a way, isn't it?
You know, and also I don't know if I mentioned it at one time, there's really a wonderful documentary. If you don't have Netflix, it's worth getting Netflix just to watch the documentary. And it was a program of daughters, and these are mostly Black kids, and their fathers were mostly Black. And they were able to, they could only minimally visit their fathers because you're behind a glass and you talk on a, you know, like a telephone thing. And they had this program where they prepared both the men and the girls to meet each other and to dress as though they were at the prom, and that the fathers were dancing with them so that they would have a physical experience of what it felt like to connect with their fathers. And it changed them and the girls, and it really changed the men dramatically. And they've actually been able to get that program in a few other prisons. So really worth watching.
Thank you. Yes, so another, Bessel, I think you mentioned psychedelics as far as being able to, you know, neuroplasticity. That came up quite a bit. The folks out there have a lot of questions about getting all the nods now, like, yeah, ask them. Of where, I guess, let me point the question a bit, because it's a broad topic. How do you see psychedelics? Each of you, you know, has your own style, your beautiful style of how you work with clients. How do you see psychedelics being incorporated going forward in this field?
Well, so I worked with psychedelics for the last 15 years. Began to work with this Peruvian plant called ayahuasca. And then, I mean, when I say work, I mean therapeutically with groups or individuals. With ayahuasca, it was always groups, or psilocybin mushrooms, very rarely LSD, certainly MDMA. And I think all of us here would agree that they have a lot of potential. We've all seen quite dramatic transformations, because how I see it is, you know, Freud having said that dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. The problem is that when you read Freud's dream interpretations, they're totally arbitrary and nonsensical. I mean, where is he even coming from? But with psychedelics, the person is actually there to witness their own unconscious. So you might say that psychedelics are a royal road to the unconscious, and they get to experience some of the deepest traumas and pains and terrors and physical distress. Or on the other hand, they can actually experience themselves as whole and connected and part of the universe. And, you know, you can all these different states. You can go from hell to heaven in one psychedelic experience. And you can identify a lot of stuff about yourself, and you can witness yourself as an adult, ideally and necessarily in the presence of the kind of people who had been there for you in the first place. You wouldn't need to do therapy in the second place. In other words, loving acceptance, being seen, understood, and being held. And being held is crucial because people can go through a lot of stuff under the impact of psychedelics. And if you're held in the right way, and then if you help to integrate what you've learned, that's crucial here. It's not about the experience. It's about what have you seen, what door has opened, and then how do you keep walking through that door. So that's on the positive side. And, ketamine is being used these days, and people getting all kinds of good results, although, it's still under study. That's on the positive side. On the negative side, I say two things. One is that people become extraordinarily vulnerable and influenceable under the impact of psychedelics.
Yeah.
And if they're not in the right hands, it can be really damaging. That's even in the hands of well-meaning providers who don't have the depth and the training to be fully present with whatever arises for the person. And I've seen people being damaged that way. In a worst case scenario, that vulnerability that arises is exploited. And I've seen sexual exploitation in the psychedelic world, both in shamans from Peru, MDMA providers in North America. That's not unusual. I mean, you see that throughout, whenever there is authority and vulnerability, and especially if there's some healing power connected with that authority, and that authority hasn't cleared themselves fully, there's a chance of exploitation. So there's that danger. A larger issue for me, and I'm interested in the other people's comments here, is why the interest in psychedelics. I mean, it's legitimate interest, and it's merited, and they're worthwhile to explore and to incorporate into the treatment protocols that we have, obviously with more research that's needed, but even what we already know, we ought to know how to do a lot with them. But part of the reason is the utter barrenness of Western psychiatry, for the most part. I'm talking about the mainstream model here, not individual practitioners, and the narrowness of Western medical and therapeutic thinking, which makes people desperate for an alternative. So my bit of a concern that I have is that we're going to pour all our hopes and expectations into being rescued by psychedelics. But I think we need to do a lot more to reform or transform the therapeutic world in general, and not just put all eggs into that psychedelic basket. And another final point is the expense. You might argue that in the long term, it'll save money, but in the short term, how many people can afford even an ayahuasca ceremony, which here in North America is probably $300-400 a night, and let alone going to Peru or Colombia or Guatemala or any of these countries. And MDMA therapy, which may prove to be cost effective if you really treat PTSD in somebody, but upfront, it's still very expensive. It's 2 therapists working with you over, I don't know how many sessions. So there's that cost expense. And then finally, the accessibility, because how many trustworthy, really good therapists can we find out there as compared to the need that's out there, and how many people will really have access to it. So those are both my appreciations and concerns about the psychedelic movement.
Promises and pitfalls, both.
Yeah.
Promises and pitfalls. There's another wonderful story, actually was another video. I don't know if it's on Netflix anymore, called The Last Shaman. And it's about this young man. His parents are both doctors, medical doctors, and they provide for his needs and so forth, but there really was very little in the way of warmth and holding. And so he suffers from significant depression. So he wanted to see about doing ayahuasca. So he traveled to Peru, and each of the shamans that he met, he realized they were either just out for the money or they were out to have control over people.
Yeah.
And so he continued, and somehow he found his way to this mountain village in Peru. And he met the shaman, and the shaman really warmly took him under his wings. And he he said he gave him a ritual to do for a month. And at the end, they would decide together if he would do the ayahuasca. And so while he was doing the ritual, this was a community that were completely different than his family. But these people are warm, the children are spontaneous and free. And he kind of really got held in that warmth, that basket of warmth. And then finally, at the end of the month, they said, yes, you can take the ayahuasca, but you have to stay here for another month afterwards.
Mm.
And time again, he was with these tremendously warm, connected people. And at the end, as I recall, he says, this was helpful, but it didn't take care of everything. It wasn't the solution. And so, again, I think how important it is to prepare people for it and to do follow-up. I think that's what's necessary. And what was a little disturbing to me, I was really brokenhearted about what happened with the MDMA
A
study.
little disturbing.
And that's why I'm holding on to you here. This Australian woman, she said something quite revealing. She had taken MDMA. She had childhood sexual abuse, and she felt that it really helped. But she also asked people to be more careful in its use. And because I think in one way, I think part of this was, of course, this was that people who, how to say this, I'll think about it.
Shall I take over? So
Yeah, you go on that.
I've run a psychedelic lab for the last 8 years with a team of 8 wonderful people, one of whom is here in St. Cor. And we did the largest psychedelic study done up to date. Actually, 2 studies, one of which was declared by the journal Science, one of the most important scientific breakthroughs of the year.
Journal Science.
Yeah.
Wow.
Top-notch scientific journals. I was skeptical about it because we did psychotherapy alone versus psychotherapy plus MDMA, and I thought therapy would really do at least as well or almost as well, so it wouldn't add very much. And I was mainly confronted with the limitations of therapy compared to the MDMA plus therapy. MDMA, I was very cautious. I've done 50 years of study, so I've studied many different modalities. My hopes were very high, and I actually specifically asked people to not include people who had chronic histories of abuse and neglect, because we generally do very poorly with those people. I was overruled, and so 88% of our subjects had never known what it's like to not feel safe or to feel loved. Our results were stunning, stunning. 3 whole sessions, whole days. We published it very well. We saw transformations you had never seen before, but we gave extraordinary attention to set and setting. Gabor already mentioned the whole issue of neuroplasticity. Gould Dolan, a researcher at First Hopkins now at Berkeley, has shown that on every one of the psychedelics opens up the mind to new possibilities. So what comes in during that period, for about 48 to 72 hours during after the psychedelic experience, is the critical issue, because that's when your brain gets rewired. And if people have a really good experience, they change and change like nothing else I have seen and documented in my scientific career. Then politics took over, and what happened was stunning. That the FDA did not understand why you have to do psychotherapy together with drugs. we know that
Yeah.
Prozac can solve depression or something. So the idea that you need to actually be with people and be there with them and create a sacred space. I would never use the word sacred space in my scientific articles because they would not get published. But life is about creating sacred spaces and making things a sacred experience. And when people have that, there is results that we have never seen before. And I'm sure Gabor had experiences like that himself, maybe other people also.
Sure, yeah.
How many people in this room have had psychedelic experience, by the way?
Well,
I suspected that. It's not like, see, this is a little relevant for us because, most of you, actually, my wife Lisa and I do ketamine assisted therapy. We're very happy with it, actually. And surprisingly, how well it works with people we know very well, have a long-term relationship with. But I imagine that many of you do underground therapy or receive underground therapy. As long as things are underground, there's no quality control.
Yeah.
We don't know what's happening. We
That's
cannot
right.
collect data. I know many underground people who I greatly admire and love and are wonderful people, but I don't know how responsible people are. The main error I see these days is in mainstream psychiatry, which, as Gabor so well pointed out, is broken and also actively opposed to psychedelic therapies. But what's been ironic is that we did the research, we did the science, man, we up to a zoo. And then we did it and was turned down. And they said the dangers outweigh the benefits, even though we had over 200 people in our program, not a single person had serious side effects. And 85% of them
Well,
did
you know,
amazingly well.
you didn't understand what they meant. You didn't understand what they meant. They meant the dangers to mainstream psychiatry.
Oh, yeah, they left that out. But so, you live, you want to see how things develop. And I thought this time we really did it. We worked our asses off in this study. My God, it was an awful study to do, actually, because you had to, every time somebody farted, you had to make sure it's left. Unbelievable. But we did the science. And then they said no. And the next years we're back. And that is very worrisome. So there is a ballot question in Massachusetts, ballot question number 4. I just wrote an editorial for the Boston Globe. Oh yes on ballot 4, because now it's a political question and it's a local question. And so communities and states will have to say these things are illegal. And also the ballot question number 4 in Massachusetts has very clear strictures of how much training people need, how much supervision people need, and to make sure that it's really done on very safe places. So it's now in the political realm. We did the science, so that's don't really do that anymore. Of course we should, but it's up to us in a way. So what I'd like to say to clinicians like you is, don't leave it up to Gabor and me to change the world. It's up to all of us.
Well, yeah.
Leave it up to Scott and Peter.
yeah.
It's kind of the genie's out of the box.
And
My first use of MDMA was called Atom at the time, was 1973
Yeah,
by Sasha Shulgin, who was this biochemist.
yeah.
And then Leo Zeff in Berkeley was doing couples work with it, where they could really open honestly with their heart together. Then it became a party drug.
Yep.
And it became a party drug.
Yep.
And then it came up again.
Yep.
Like you said, that the FDA, the APA nixing that, but I think there's no way it's not going to come up again because it has effectiveness. And one of the things that really caught my interest was when they said, well, what is the psychotherapy? And then they said, well, if you're testing it as a drug, you can test it as a drug, but not a drug and psychotherapy, psychotherapy and a drug. But that's the essence of how it should be used.
That's right.
Yeah.
Listen, but here's the question I like to put to you, you being a researcher. Recently, the FDA rejected MDMA. Part of the argument was that it wasn't properly double-blinded. And,
Right.
and my point here is, I always thought for years that MAPS in pushing these double-blind studies were barking up the wrong tree, because you can't double-blind psychedelics. There's no way that somebody doesn't
Although
know.
quite a few are.
So,
Recently, actually,
so,
about
so-
a third of our subjects
so
who got placebo
Yeah.
thought they got psychedelics.
Yeah.
Because the setting was so
That's right.
magical that
That-
they still thought they got
That's
the
right.
drug, actually. So
Yes.
it cannot be done
Exactly, that
efficiently.
holding environment.
It cannot be done, I mean, cannot be done convincingly enough. I doubt it. So I'm just asking, should there be not another way of studying this without double-blind stuff?
I mean, actually,
Yeah.
when some of the videos you showed me about people, vets or military
Yeah.
people, and when I saw it, I thought this is so similar to what happens in sessions
Mhm.
when I work with people.
Yeah.
So similar, and so again, blending the best of both. I
yeah.
think that's where it's,
Oh, I think
that'll be the next iteration. I think.
I think that's we're very much into that.
Yeah.
Working with the
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
That's right.
And one of the things I'm really curious about is that people talk about trauma as a psychological event, but as Gabor was one of the early people who pointed out, it goes into people's immune system, in people's core physiology. And there's enough anecdotes of people who have chronic fibromyalgia and chronic pain syndromes getting better on psychedelics, that this is a very important area that we need to look at much more carefully also.
Yeah, yeah.
And working with the body, as my psychologists are always yak. But you need to work with the body and bodily experience
Yeah.
to truly integrate it. Very important. Yeah.
I'll say that the placebo effect that you experienced, I think a lot of people doing somatic work, that is the experience they
Yeah,
can
that's
enter
right.
into.
That's right.
And I will say that what I have experienced often missing, and when I have had patients come in that were radically dissociated or
Yeah.
developed dissociative tendencies post treatment or post was often because there wasn't a phasic process. There wasn't the integration at
Yeah,
the end and
absolutely.
the preparatory process to begin with.
Yeah.
It was just the right on in
Yeah.
without the resourcing, without the capacity, without the ability to ground, without the ability to witness, pre-developed, and the ability to integrate, because a lot of the tools that are emerging from those psychedelic processes are about how do we then apply them in our daily life. So if I, for the first time, don't feel alone, I had in a ketamine
Yeah.
experience I remember this little piglet came in and I poked it. And it was this mother energy light that just shone in. What the fuck? But it was the first time I didn't feel alone in my life. And it's something then that I apply of like every time I feel alone. And it's not that it's I feel alone. There's a part of me that hasn't been integrated that feels alone. I just poked that little piggy. In comes that mother light energy. And that's the application. That's the integration,
Yeah.
because all of a sudden I'm integrating it into my parts as well as my whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what happens on psychedelics. And
Yeah.
that's why it's so promising.
Yeah.
But also the issue of it being a sacred experience is very essential. And you're a sacred person going through it.
Yeah.
You're not this fucked up DSM person.
Yeah.
You're a whole human being
Yeah.
who integrates yourself.
Yeah.
And the surprises are astounding
Yeah.
because your mind is manifested.
Yeah.
I can tell you an amazing case here in Boston. I actually write this up in the Mythonormal. This woman had scleroderma. She worked at Harvard as an assistant to a great researcher. And she had scleroderma, which sclerosis means hardening derm skin. So scleroderma is a hardening of the connective tissue. And literally, it stiffens your joints and your muscles and your face. So people with scleroderma have this rigid grin. And she was so immobilized, she couldn't even get out of bed by herself. And the anti-inflammatories, the immune suppressants, the steroids, none of them worked. She just wanted to die. If there had been doctor-assisted, medically assisted death in Boston, she would have chosen it. Then she did ayahuasca. She actually ordered ayahuasca. Somewhere she got it online. I don't recommend this. And she did it on her own.
Wow.
And that she stood up by herself for the first time in months. These entities showed up to support her. Now, those entities, I think, were projections of her own strength and so on. But and to make a long story short, she would, and I know the story is true because I called her family physician to verify it here in Boston, and she verified it. And this woman is now hiking and walking around and writing a book. She's not through all her challenges, but she's outlived her prognosis by many years by now. And she's mobile and she's active and she's independent. What nobody asked her about in all the years that she was being treated for scleroderma was any childhood trauma, any stress. She was I'm not going to go into the details, terribly traumatized person. And that's what the plant somehow gave her the insight to find her strength, but also to start dealing with the trauma. She's had a lot of psychotherapy since. I'm just telling you, it's one of these miracle things where I've done ayahuasca many times. I've never had entities show up. No angels, no animals, nothing, no pigs, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
How does it feel to be a complete
but I
failure?
do think that when these entities show up, they're actually a part of yourself.
Yeah.
That the plant or the MDMA or whatever shows you that you weren't in touch with. So I think that's quite an amazing potential. Yeah.
Just going off of what you were saying about the placebo in this experiment and how people still had that same experience as if they were on the plant medicine. I think that speaks to a shared field of energy. I don't think it's just that they thought that they were on it. I think they literally could feel what was going on in the room around them. That's what people are starting to find with energy healing, which is starting to come forward. I think it's like the last of the legs here, but it shares a similar vibe as sort of the plant.
Yeah, but the interesting thing of our study was that we had this great therapist and great environment, and they thought that would do quite well. And some people thought they had a psychedelic experience, but the people who took MDMA did much better than the people who got just all the good stuff of relationships. It makes you feel modest about yourself as a therapist. I trained most of the therapists, they're very good therapists, and they did not have the same results as therapy plus MDMA.
It's super interesting.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, do you see, because I loved what you brought up about the issues with psychedelics, of it being expensive and the upfront costs and the accessibility and all of these things.
And I think it's important to identify the colonization of it.
Yes, absolutely, right? Like it's really, people call it new, but it's the old, right? And in that same regard, there's people that are finding the same experiences with plants through just energy. And what do you say to that? Are we going to see a study of that anytime soon? I know there's some people working on it in the Philippines who've working with different neuroscience and things like that. But is that something that you see kind of maybe pioneer coming forward, or what are your thoughts around that?
I don't think you can get funding for it. One thing that really intrigues me is that I sometimes hang out with people who grew up in the Baptist church, Black people who grew up in the Baptist church, and I was always very impressed with wow, man, there's a lot of amazing energy in the service. It helped me to survive in Chicago, just like it did Obama, actually. Nobody would study it. I can't imagine somebody will get money to study something like that.
People can say that about your work as well at some point, 30 years ago, and it's happening. What was I going to say? Only because the the non-dual, what you were describing as far as the pig, that was such a beautiful image, by the way. So, and accurate, and all the people that raise their hand, you know, a lot of people are having these experiences. It references non-duality consciousness, which is old as dirt. People have been writing about this for tens of thousands of years. And it's something that I think we're seeing people get more interested in. But you're right, the funding thing is an issue. The abuse of power thing is going to remain an issue. I don't know what we do about that. This also leads to a bit of a question that a couple of people had around once you have this sort of peak experience, or you get this sort of over this initial trauma through any of the means that we've talked about up here, what comes after that? It seems like there's a theme of present moment being something to focus on after you kind of get over a big hurdle. But what advice do you give to someone when they start getting beyond trauma? That's come up a few times in conversation.
Well, there's this book, who was it, Ram Dass or Jack Korn? Somebody wrote this book called After Enlightenment, The Laundry, you know. I don't know. I've never had a peak experience in that sense. So I have no idea. So, you know,
Sorry, baby. I'm so sorry.
I know people who have.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say much here because I have no experience with it, but it takes a lot of integration afterwards.
Yeah.
You know, and the
Sometimes
idea
a
that you get
life-
into an ideal state, life is tough. My old friend David van Schreiber said, every life is difficult. And every life continues to be difficult. And so not like at one point you get the right experience, you work with Peter Levine and forever after you float through the universe. No, that's not how it goes. Like,
Oh my God.
you didn't know that.
Then I give up.
Sometimes what is perceived as what happens next is the future. And in Judith Herman's model, after we have these processes of letting go, there's a future. Who am I without this? You know, we'll talk about that in a few days too, but it's what am I? You know, one of the things that you were talking about in Anaheim is, and I think Bessel, you were too. I don't know if you guys knew that you were each talking about it, but one of the significant elements that's robbed from you with trauma is a sense of purpose and future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
what happens when you suddenly you might experience the possibility of future again? And how do you integrate into that sense of time and space
Yeah.
and possibility?
Yeah. I think,
We're just fixing your mic.
hey,
Hey,
money or your
movement
life.
break.
Let's see, you were talking about
Pigs.
pigs, but
No, the future.
the future.
And-
Yeah.
yeah.
I think
and-
so much of psychotherapy in general is about the past.
Yeah.
And much less about the future. And I
Absolutely.
think that's a big failure of all psychotherapies.
Yeah. It belongs now in the realm of coaches, which is great.
Yeah. It's
And-
not a bad
and-
idea.
And why not us just integrate time back in? That's what we're
Yeah.
doing as trauma therapists.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, ideally.
Yeah.
And that's what we saw, and we were able to document it with the psychedelics,
Yeah.
is that people relive their trauma. They
Yeah.
oftentimes are extremely painful experiences,
Yeah.
and their time sense changes.
Yeah.
And they say, this happened to me when I was 3 years old or 8 years old. It's not happening now.
Yeah.
And I think the big neurobiological change is your time sense come alive and say, today is today.
Yeah.
And the past informs me, but it doesn't dominate me. And that's what
Yeah.
we really saw in psychedelics so beautifully.
Yeah.
Your time sense changes.
Yeah.
But I think your time sense also changes when you do very good somatic work.
Yeah.
Because you
Absolutely.
really bring people into the
course.
present, you live it right now. And it's
Yeah.
and you don't
I'm-
talk about it.
I'm just wondering if there are other questions,
Yeah.
from, you know,
I'm sorry,
on other
I
topics.
love where you sticking with psychedelics. I do just want to say really quickly, we did a demo virtually once, Peter, and
Oh, yeah.
I have done ayahuasca several times, and it felt like I had you just did somatics with me. You did somatic experiencing with me, and I could literally feel the neuroplasticity of my brain
Yeah.
afterwards.
Yeah.
So it is not, it's all connected.
It's not one or the
Yeah,
other.
exactly.
And I think that's really, hopefully, where things will evolve.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I see that. I do.
And research is a big part of that.
It's fun. So a question that I think is really interesting is there's been this theme of everyone saying that you meet the client where they are, meet people where they are. It's really important. How do we mitigate that when there's the risk of harm or when
Oh,
where someone is
gosh.
isn't enough? How do we show up for them and, encourage them for the growth that's happening? But what happens when the growth isn't happening fast enough?
Wait a minute, risk of harm to who? The therapist, the client, or
The,
who?
cli- the,
Therapist perspective.
yeah, or what we're really talking about is more systemic issues, where, it's like we want to acknowledge growth where you see it, but what if how do we show up when the growth is still not enough? It's not, and harm is being caused when there's an urgency for change because of harm, but we want to meet people where they are. And I can give you an example of an
Sure.
abusive husband who sorry, trigger warning here, who might knock, his wife down the stairs. And then the next time he just punches a wall by her head. And we would say, that's progress, right? It is, right? In a way that's still very dangerous,
So you're talking about the client causing harm?
Yes, the client causing harm.
Okay, got it.
And how do we hold space for
Oh.
people? And then on a larger systemic level, you can look at all these systems of oppression.
Confused.
And how do we stay encouraging, but also demand, not demand change, but sometimes it doesn't seem enough to just say, you're progressing, that's growth, right? And it's not quite enough.
Well, but it's very judgmental on our part to award people. It's not for us to say, oh, it's better to hit the wall than we hit your wife. That's how do you feel about hitting the wall instead of your wife? It's their life. It's not. So my judgment is really not all that important there. It's like, how are you doing? How is that frightened, angry boy inside of you that gets out of control? How's he doing? How can we help him? It's not like, oh, good boy. No, that's not our job. Yeah?
But you're still asking, I mean, I'm just really trying to understand this question. So somebody comes to you who's got violent tendencies, they might be hurting their family. And you're working with, but they're actually coming to you for help, which is very often they don't, of course.
Yeah.
But if they're coming to you for help, obviously they're recognizing there's a problem. But you still feel or still believe that they haven't progressed to the point where they still might be hurting somebody. Then what do? I have no idea. I have no idea.
Depends
I
on,
mean, there might be some legal
it depends on your
responsibilities.
licensure.
Right.
There's a lot of,
you know,
there was a table of people who work in social work and
Yeah.
that sort of thing who had
Yeah.
this question.
Yeah.
And they're dealing with these. They're being faced with these questions.
Yeah.
So that's not a therapeutic question so much as a legal question, perhaps.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it varies state to state,
Yeah. Yeah.
and different licensures have different protocols, and so I think that it varies.
Yeah.
Again, it's a question of looking for programs that work.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, we had the great fortune of visiting a program in LA called Homeboy Industries. It is spectacular. It's a program for kids who grew up in gangs who never had any parent taking care of them, et cetera, et cetera. And they are working and doing things. And the first thing when these kids come out of jail is said, what do you need right now? I need food. I need a place to sleep. That's where social work started in Boston, all places, actually. what do you need? But we don't do that anymore because we get paid by insurance companies to talk to people.
Yeah.
But real social work traditionally was, how can I help you?
How can I build enough or safe enough to address the other components?
It's helpful. We love it. This is a great question as well. So it's about staying connected and open to our clients without becoming so porous that we burn out or have to develop a wall for protection. Where do you find that line, and how do you know when what maybe a better question is, what resources do you use to ensure that you are connected but not too porous, not absorbing?
Do you recall the conversation this afternoon? And Peter was talking about the membrane.
Mhm.
That's precisely what he was talking about there.
And if we're looking at a cell, it's a double lipid membrane.
Yeah.
So, and if we're looking at even our skin, there's multiple layers. So it's not just like open or close, it's
Yeah.
about modulation. It's
Yeah.
about the ability of how open, how closed do I need to be in this moment with this person? And the answer is enough to be in relationship and still relate in relationship to yourself.
I think what's also important is we all need people in our lives, and we usually are very poor judges of ourselves. And that's why it's important to have intimate partners who can say, honey, you have been out of it for the last few days. You're not there, you're not paying attention to me, you're sitting on your computer, you get irascible. We need feedback from our loved ones. I don't think most of us, certainly not I, am wise enough to know at any moment how my own state is, but hopefully there's people around me who's from time to say, that's where you're losing it.
Yeah, so I hear you saying support systems are necessary of human variety.
Intimate support system.
I mean,
yeah.
the first initial experience of regulation is co-regulation.
Yeah.
And that always carries forth
Yeah.
in our lives, in our intimate lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it's a question around boundaries, I would say let's go back to the origins of boundaries. It's the first boundary is literally the womb. Or if you want to go embryologically, it's some other pieces before that. And then in that process of co-regulation, when we hold an infant, yeah, that's another sense of container or boundary so that they can have their experience and be held in it. And again, so often that is missed. And so even from the get-go, we may not know the modulation of boundary and the sense of being held within our experience and still be able to connect to other people. I can't remember if anyone here remembers Prentice Hemphill's quote on boundaries. It's pretty brilliant. I can't remember it offhand, but look it up. I don't remember the good shit.
Was that a teaser?
Yeah, it's a teaser. You can look up there. Or someone can look it up.
Who's the person?
Prentice Hempill.
Okay.
They were featured in Brene Brown's work on the Atlas of the Heart as well.
Nice.
And a really beautiful quote essentially of like boundaries are the way that we can be in ourselves and still feel the presence of another person.
Okay.
Yeah, well, for sure.
I've gotten to the end of my list of questions, but I'm gonna keep kind of stirring the pot around how to show up. How to show up in this space, because so many, when I kind of take the temperature of the people here, so many of us care about other people. We're kind of coming from this space of care. And sometimes we're running into, there's one more question I'm gonna actually weave in. I'm finding a way to do it. About the impact that people are having. So one of the questions I was asked is around intent versus impact, which I know we talk about a lot in Embody Lab. There's a difference between what we intend versus how it's landing. When we're working with people, in this case, someone was working with someone who, by and large, does not understand that impact is more important than intent. What are some of the ways that, especially being in this position of caregivers, space holders for others, can we encourage or explain that in a way that others can understand, because people are having a difficult time explaining that. So if you have anything to share around that, that would be great. That's good.
One of the great things I learned from Peter is he shows videotapes.
Yeah.
And I think, and I often ask people, do you take videotapes of your own work? And hardly anybody does.
Really?
And my response is, how can you ever learn?
Yeah.
Because if you don't see your own work, you're caught up in your own delusional system about how you think you're working. And one of the most courageous things that really was my initial bond with Peter, he showed his videotapes and he dared to show his videotapes. Most of
Yeah.
us wouldn't be so eager to do that because it'd be very embarrassing to see it. But for God's sake, look at your videotape, see yourself at work, and then you can distinguish between intent and impact. But only if you take a video,
Yeah.
but only show it to people who you really love and trust.
Yeah, that's like, and then,
Yeah.
there's a rule of three that I teach in somatic experiencing. The first is 3 minutes. So if you get something about that person in the first 3 minutes, then things are going to move in a more coherent way.
Mhm.
Then the other three is to make at least 3 mistakes in the session
Mhm.
and to know what they were.
Yeah.
And that's what you're talking about.
And when you take a videotape, you go,
Yep.
oh shit.
Yeah, I mean, that wasn't good, but it wasn't horrible, but. How are
Can
we
you
doing
ask the
with
question
time?
again? I think we
I think we got some, I think we're good. Can't see the clock back there,
have a
but
few more minutes.
what were you gonna say, Scott? I feel like.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I love the way that they were taking it. It's just around intent and impact of our work.
But
of
the
others.
part I would try to understand is Peter and the Bessel answered it in terms of the intent of the therapist
Yes.
and
Yeah.
impact. Is that what you meant? Or did you mean the person that you're dealing with who doesn't get the impact?
That was the original question.
Right.
Mhm. But
right.
I enjoyed, I very much, I think it's also something to consider is our own version of that, how we internalize that. So I was really grateful for those answers.
Yeah.
But if you want to take a stab at this, it's an interesting question. Because again, I don't know how much we're responsible. Another way they phrased it was how responsible are, because we're not responsible for other people's actions, so to speak, right? But we are responsible for our impact on them. That was another way that it was sort of,
But-
it was a discussion more than a question that I tried to boil into a question.
I don't think we're necessarily responsible for their impact, but if we care about them, we're responsible for showing up to meet them in the impact they experienced. And I think that's a real big discernment. If they can't discern that, that means they're probably in a state that they need more validation, empathy to be able to discern that. And that's not easy. No, that's anyone here ever been in a relationship? That's not easy. You know, of like, you did this to me. Wow, my words really impacted you. That really hurt something deep. I love you so much and you deserve to feel safe. I mean, oh,
Yeah, that would be nice to hear.
that'd be nice to hear. But that means we have to be in our own sense of safety and regulation, and there's been enough built up. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead. Are you complete? No, okay.
Yeah. I want you to have a peak moment.
Well, what comes up for me is something that Alma said, A.H. Alma, who I quoted today.
Yeah.
Like, it's a question of, is this person willing to look at the truth?
Yeah.
And Alma said, only when compassion is present are people willing to see the truth.
Yeah.
So this goes along with what Scott says. Can we show up for them in such a compassionate way that they actually don't have to defend themselves anymore? And they are there for some reason. If they're in your office or in your presence, they're there for some reason. And they have some sense that something's not working in their lives. So it's a matter of going back to their intention of what they're wanting to get from this process of working with you.
Yeah.
And then you can, if I identify that, then you can, and if there's sufficient compassion that you're manifesting, then they won't be so threatened to look at the actual truth of the impact of what they're doing. And then you can ask them, well, given your intention that brought you to talk to me, how is this working for you? How is that showing up in your life? But again, I think compassion is the key, tremendous compassion. And my question to you is, Jamila, is
You should trademark that.
so when you work with these people, what do you feel when you notice that they're not getting the impact of their intention? What's happening for you?
Yeah.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. This didn't happen to me. This happened to someone I spoke with, but I can think of an example where this is happening to me in my life.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it's a little active,
Sorry?
it's activating. It's active.
Okay, well then Peter would say, and I would say, I also would say, then you're gonna deal with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's what's in the
That's
way.
the starting
Because the
point.
client knows when you're activated.
Mhm.
Energetically, they just pick up on that. Immediately they get defensive. So it's really on you at this point, not on them. That's what I would say.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's true.
I think it was a question you almost asked and then shifted too about like, there's so many of us that want to help people. And something I've been really sitting with is someone asked me this question, and it was probably one of the most profound questions I've ever been asked, or it was more of a statement or reflection, which was, how are you caring and loving for people in the way you wish you would have been? And how is that driving your life? And I think that ability for so many of us, you talked about the wounded healer,
Around, yeah.
and how many of us are in this field trying to love the world in the way we wish we would have. And in that process, it's beautiful. And sometimes it's a way of not being in contact yet with the way that we still need to be filled.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to go to bed.
So I don't know how much time is left for the Q&A. We still have some more. Oh, okay,
We have
perfect,
13.
perfect timing, see? Awesome. So are we gonna start with the online? Okay, let's pull it on up.
And just a reminder, if we can keep the questions to 1 to 2 sentences, any preposition or story, we're gonna release into ourself and know that we are seen by ourselves.
Mhm.
And the question will simply be the question. And we will remind you if you get into narrative.
Love it. So
Is that cute, that picture?
we're gonna start
Hello.
with- we can hear it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Masha. I work with women who have PTSD, often as a result of sexual trauma. What are some unique techniques in your experience to integrate women back into their bodies and emotions when the extreme stressor was as visceral and primal as sexual violation?
Yeah, that's a good question. Big, important question. In many people, many women, they've had therapy and they know what the trauma was, and they probably have also felt some of the emotions. And so they feel this relief. But then when they go home and their partner touches them, their whole body stiffens and retracts. So until they're able also to work with the body response and depotentiate that, then it's just going to be more and more frustration.
Absolutely. Not to work with the body.
Yeah, no shortcuts.
I guess my question is, I do that work, and so I'm looking for anything beyond the general somatic approaches that you've experienced when working with those that population that you might change or adjust in your technique when working somatically with them.
Je ne sais pas.
It's a great question. I think we're somatic therapy.
My wife Lisa, she starts in Tibet. She's not here. Who's a body worker? Starts with tuning forks to just begin to allow yourself to have a sensation. And many people who have been sexually abused have really a very frozen relationship to their body, very frightened, and they're very frightened of desire.
Yes.
Because
Yes,
the feeling of desire is that caused me to get abused. So they're very afraid to allow themselves to have sexual feelings. So opening up very gently, but just a little feeling of vibration, feeling yourself, holding yourself, being held. Very, very gradual, slow process of but Peter knows. Peter's my big teacher in this, so why am I talking like this?
it's okay. You can be my student. But yeah, I mean, in so much of this, I mean, the subtext in a lot of what we've been talking about is what can you do to help people make at least one small step back to their body, and then build on that, and then build on that. Yeah. I don't think there's one technique that just will take care of everything, but that is a basic theme or a basic strategy, I think.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Do an in-person one? I think my mic is muted, but.
Here? Okay. My question is to Gabor. Two short questions from my side. One is, what is, for people who have read your books, visited your lessons, what is the biggest misconception that you see people taking away out of this room? And second question, with your teaching, which audience did you desire to hit, but you haven't hit them as much as you wish to?
The second question I didn't quite get, but yeah, go ahead.
I can repeat it for you. It's what's the audience that you would like to reach, essentially, who that you haven't reached yet?
Well, okay. Well, I mean, what's the audience we'd like to reach? 7 billion human beings or 8 billion, that's the audience I'd like to reach. Don't we all want to reach that audience?
That would make you into a billionaire.
Sorry?
That would make you into a billionaire.
Yeah, well, I'll take that. The misconception, and I think we've all experienced this. People come up, and I think this happens to teachers of all kinds, the spiritual teachers or healers, is people project their own strength and their own capacities and their own ability to transform their own true selves onto the teacher. So they think it's coming from me, whereas any of us,
Well said.
first of all, it's not coming from us, it's coming through us. And it's that projection where they put too much of the credit. I mean, we all deserve credit for the work that we do, and all four of us have worked damn hard to learn what we've learned and be able to teach what we've learned. I mean, we put in a lot of work. And I'll say a lot more work than most people would even realize, both in the sense of professional work and personal work on ourselves and all this stuff. So that's true. And the respect for that is welcome. But there's a kind of projection of people's inner better selves on to me that I've seen, which is robbing them of power. So that's the biggest misconception. Do you understand that one?
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of who I'd like to reach, I'd like to get an article in the New York Times about me, like Bessel has had,
I'm so good.
Me too.
I don't know. So, I mean, who I'd like to reach? I'd like to reach everybody. Every lawyer in this country,
Yeah.
every physician in this country,
know.
or all over the world, every
Mhm.
therapist, every
Yeah.
so everybody. I mean, there's no limit to what I'd like to
There's a statue in Stockholm
Yeah,
of a man named Swedenborg, who was a
Yeah.
mystic in the 16th, 15th,
yeah,
or 16th, 17th century. And I just happened to notice it because I was sitting there with my lunch.
yeah.
And it looked like he had a book. And there was a little girl, a young girl, right there, and he was showing her a book. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. And I looked more carefully, and he was holding a mirror.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Beautiful.
Mm.
I know you talked about genetics and predisposition on certain illnesses. I do energy work and I look at the energy of trauma. And sometimes when I work with people, there's generational trauma that I can pick up on.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about your thoughts about that generational trauma because it's beyond just mother, father, grandfather. It's beyond that I'm working with. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on that, like if it's true or you believe that, because when I work with it, I feel it, I see it, I can trace it back almost 3-4 generations sometimes. And one of my things that I was trained in when I do healing.
We're just going to stick to the question, my love.
Okay, I'm just your thoughts on that.
Thank you.
Period.
We're asking.
Yeah.
Do
There's
you
no,
believe in generational or the energy of
yes,
trauma
ancestors.
Well,
But it's not just the trauma that get passed on, but sometimes great amounts of wisdom and life-saving information that also gets passed. And it's in this, you say you do energy work, but it's in an energy field embedded with a larger energy field within an energy field, including the ancestors, and then the energy field of, I don't know, the cosmos, I guess. The person who wrote about this most beautifully was, oh God, what was it? A German nun. What the hell was her name?
Hildegard von Bingen.
if you can, I think you said feel those other generations.
Yes.
Well, more power to you, okay? And if that's how you work, that obviously informs your work and it obviously makes it that much more effective. So that's great. Trauma is always multi-generational. I mean, it virtually always almost multi-generational. I'm talking about not the kind of trauma that occurs in times of war or you know the tsunami. That's not multi-generational. That's just but the everyday trauma that we deal with is almost always multi-generational. Having said that, and of course now these days there's a lot of interest in the epigenetic studies where we're showing that epigenetic effects can be passed on. Although I have to say that I don't think we fully understand the significance of all that yet and how much it really means, practically speaking. But certainly there's some interesting openings in that direction. Having said all that, I have yet to find a person that I work with that I can't find the reasons or the source of the trauma in their own lives.
In the here and now.
So whether or not it's been passed on generationally or not, to me, first of all, I take it for granted, but it's not as relevant because I'm interested in that person's life in this generation and what they've experienced in this generation and not how that shows up in the present, in their bodies and in their psyches. So
But sometimes
I don't know if I fully answered your question, but I'm just telling you how I relate to it.
Thoughts on how you thought about that?
That's how I think about it.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank
you.
You know, one of my favorite songs is a Hebrew song. Goes, Yehuda te leolam teshev Yerushalayim t'dor vador. We have been on forever, and it's passed from generation to generation. We are all products of where we come from. in a
Yeah.
very deep way. Every interaction that we have
Yeah,
with our parents, our caregivers, our friends,
yeah.
are the accumulation of energy from the over generations. So that's
Yeah.
who we are. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Rachel, and in all my training so far, I've been taught the importance, in my somatic trainings, the importance of keeping the client in the window of tolerance. And I had 16 years of really severe trauma symptoms, including a severe gait impediment, and nothing was helping, including psychedelics and all kind of somatic therapies. And a year ago, I found a method called psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy that has you focus on symptoms of dissociation, coldness, absence, and floatiness. And it puts you straight into sympathetic activation followed by a collapse. And in 1 month, I went from being able to walk two blocks to 2 miles. So I'm interested in your opinion of a trauma therapy that would take the client through dissociation into full-on sympathetic activation. Do you think this is advisable, useful? Have you heard of it? I'd like your opinion on this.
Obviously, was helpful for you. I
Listen,
think you answered your
Rachel,
own question.
Rachel, listen.
I'd like your opinion on it if you know about it.
Okay, listen to
I
me.
don't know about
Listen,
it.
listen for a second. Okay, can I ask you a question?
Yeah,
You had this therapy.
yes,
You couldn't walk before,
right,
and then you're walking 2 miles or 2 blocks or whatever. Is that right?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. It
What
was
if all
very
four of
helpful.
us, what if all 4 of us said, this is nonsense, it doesn't work? What would that mean to you?
Well, I'm,
Would you believe us?
yes, yes.
Oh,
No,
really?
no.
You'd believe us even though you're walking and it's really helped you?
I think this therapy may have some drawbacks, and I'm looking for people who know about it or have experienced it so I can get a more nuanced understanding of it. That's what I'm,
I don't think
looking
anybody
for
here
here.
knows about it
I think one of the things
specifically.
I think one of the things we can say is that dissociation is a gift. Yeah. And sometimes we need to be able to walk back into that gift with enough stability where we are now. And it can be a profound experience to go from a place of actually deep embodiment and touch into that unique survival strategy from a place of being here and feeling it and getting to know it. If we can feel it, we're not actually in the dissociation, we're in the realm of what it offers from a place of felt sense and place of being here.
Thank you for sharing your story.
thank you.
We need to hear stories like that from people because we learn from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the validation is in your own
Yeah.
experience.
And obviously to continue.
Yeah.
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 And you said that you thought there were some drawbacks, but maybe kind of be able to articulate those as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
all right.
Okay, so I'm Cynthia from Oregon, and I would appreciate hearing comments about what would like to address. So 19 months ago today, I was heart transplanted. So I was a recipient of a new heart. And so I wanted to talk about or get your feedback on the somatic implications of that, especially as it relates to a donor. And then the intergenerational impact that would have on me from the donor.
You know, my response to your question is oftentimes when people ask a question, I say, it looks like the person asking the question knows a lot more about it than any of the people that asked it. And so I think your question is enormously interesting, and I'd love to have dinner with you where you tell us what it's like for you.
Yeah, we talked a little bit before. Yeah, but it's some of this phenomenon is really exciting to me. What gets passed on that's in the tissue itself is quite extraordinary.
You know what I read once?
And that you have your health now.
Yeah.
My God, that's the thing. That's the
You know, I read an article about this once, and they gave a number of examples. And it seems to be valid in that somebody who received a heart transplant, and they used to be a Big Mac aficionados. The donor was a vegan. After the transplant, that person didn't want to touch meat at all.
Well,
I don't know.
physician might have also suggested, their physician might have also suggested such a thing. It's why they were there in the first place.
You want to keep your.
The question is she suing the cardiologist for taking away her taste for Big Macs?
Well, thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you all for being here and thank you for your insight, your wisdom. We're so grateful for you.
You did a great job
Yeah, thank
moderating.
you, Jim.
Really, so.
Thank you. Thank you all.